Pledge of Allegiance.
Sorry.
Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call. Marks.
Here.
Van Blarcom. Here. Thompson.
Here.
Leonard. Here. Elkin. Here. Manor. Here. Blenheim.
Here.
All right, the consent agenda items. We have the minutes from May 3rd, a special. Okay, so moving on to number 9, deliberation and action on termination appeal for police administrative assistant.
I guess I can start with my thoughts. I've had a lot of people write to me. I've had a lot of people approach me for conversations. I've also spent a lot of time in thought over the last several days. So I just have a few things that I would like to say as we start the conversation. The first thing is that I understand that Wisconsin is an at-will state and recognize and personally heard in the body cam footage I'm leaving, you'll be hearing from my attorney. But that being said, I have some pretty significant concerns and things that I just think need to be brought up. Primarily, I think that HR or some sort of third-party person should have been involved in this situation for the protection of both the city and for Ms. Eskro. I think that not having some sort of third-party person led to a lot of mishandling and made the water really muddy. It's also incredibly clear to me that we have some major trust issues between our new chief and his staff, and that's really, really disheartening to me because I'm extremely pro Amery Police Department. And I don't think that these trust issues are going to lead to productive police work in our city. So that's something that I think we really need to address. I think those trust issues may have led to this investigation. I don't know that I would jump to immediately questioning someone's intent, taking a photo if I didn't have trust issues in the first place. And the only real evidence that we have against Bethany is that she took a photo which could have been passed from person to person all over the city without her knowledge. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is that I think disrespect is extremely subjective. And in my mind, I personally see a woman who was put in a position where she was uncomfortable, likely without warning. And we all respond differently to that. I know that Steve sees her behavior as disrespectful and he has the right to that, which is why I still believe that HR or a third party should have been involved to navigate those interpersonal issues. Steve has every right to run his department the way that he sees appropriate. However, personally, I feel like both Bethany and Steve made emotional decisions in those final moments of the tape. And it's not a management decision that I personally agree with based off of the evidence that was presented. At a bare minimum, I would like to advocate that we remove the unsubstantiated claims from her termination paperwork because there's a lot of things in the paperwork presented that there is no clear evidence for. We are a board, so I know that you all can disagree with me, but I have lost a lot of sleep over this, and I felt like these things needed to be said.
In for a penny, in for a dime. I want to just say, first of all, I'm going to recuse myself from voting. Bethany and at least half of her siblings worked for me at one time or another. And I just am not very comfortable passing judgment either way on her. However, I guess I have a question for you, Beth, and I just ask you because I've known you for a long time. Do you think you'd be able to work with in that? And I'm going to pose the same question to Steve. If you got your job back, will you be able to work at that job without recrimination?
Ms. Eskro is represented by counsel, so it's up to her if she.
Exactly.
It is over to our side, essentially, we're just discussing the evidence that was presented and arguments were presented amongst yourselves. So I would caution you in asking questions, so either party understanding the desire to do so, and you need a clarifying question perhaps, but I would try to focus on what's already been presented at the hearing.
Me, I wasn't at the hearing. Can you answer? Just yes or no would be fine. Thank you. I don't want you to say any more that might, cloud anybody. Steve?
Yes. I can work with her.
I think one of the key points Michaela brought out was emotion. It's difficult to separate emotion from practical discussions especially when you're in the heat of that discussion. And I think it's kind of strange that there's body cam footage. Without that one, it would be two people's word, against the other of what was going on. And in this case, it seemed like it was just getting to be more of an emotional type of discussion than it was an interview, which for whatever reason, can trigger somebody to want to get away from that situation. So, it only comes down, in my mind, to whether Eskro leaving was reason, insubordinate reason for termination, because none of the other things have anything to do with this at all. A lot of confusion, but in my mind, that doesn't enter into what I'm going to use for decision making. So, I think it's important to keep the emotion out of it and make a solid decision for this particular one item.
I agree. I don't think that the Facebook information is material to be brought into a decision tonight.
It was a really, really tough last 6 days for myself, as I'm sure it was for Miss Eskro and the chief. I listened to the hearing, 3.5-hour hearing, several times. Since I recently, about 3 years ago, we moved here to Amery, so I'm new. I'm biased. I don't have any strong opinion about anyone. I just, listening to it, my mind had to change at least a dozen times. I would listen to one point of view, then I would listen to the other point of view. I think the chief questioned her professionally. I don't think he was harassing her. I stand behind the police chief regarding questioning and everything. However, there's just, like the other council members have said, a lot of emotions came into it. So much has transpired over the last several months. I feel for both individuals. However, we have to run a police department, and if there can't be trust and loyalty, I don't know. I agree. I had a decision made before, but now I'm leaning on the fact that I guess it's just up to the board to decide what we feel is right or wrong. There's emotions on both sides. I just so wish that Miss Eskro wouldn't have left. And there was also topics that the chief brought up regarding our handbook. And I wrote down the different notations that he had mentioned. And I read through our handbook, and it's clearly written. It's clearly written. I don't know, I just guess I'm looking for other opinions of the board.
I made lots of notes as well, as I'm sure. I personally I've faced issues with this as an employer. And been in the same situation. And I've had it go both ways. And I think that this issue, as we've all mentioned, was very emotionally charged. And I would like to think that had if we can put a little time between that day and the next day without having the last 5 minutes happen, I guess, would other emotions have come to table? That would perhaps have a different outcome from both.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to rewind, as we've said, 20 days ago. I'd love to rewind 5 months ago. And we can't do that. I would, however, like to believe in the good of humanity and that that we can maybe all get along, regardless of the circumstances that this has brought up and the last 5 months have brought up. And this is a very tough decision. Like I said, I've faced this personally, and it's not easy no matter what. So this is not a personal decision for me by any stretch of the imagination for either of you two. So this is not easy.
I've also had experience as an employer and having to face issues very similar to this. And it's never easy. There's never an exact answer, but if we could rewind, and if Ms. Eskro had asked for an hour or the rest of the day or a day off or something, using personal time off or something to kind of regroup, that would have given both of them some space to come back at it the day later and discuss it from that point forward. I don't think departing the way that Ms. Eskro did was professional, to say the least. Rather than asking her supervisor, Steve, for some time off to let this settle, to instead threaten him with legal action. I know how I would have handled that.
So I don't get a vote, but I'd like to have at least a voice. A committee hired Steve to be the police chief. Yes, I appointed Steve to that position, and it was approved by this council to be the police chief. And I agree with a lot of the council members of what's been said here today, that there was definitely a lot of emotions, and I'm sure I would have been emotional in those moments as well. I don't know that I would have made the decision at that moment. I would have allowed some time, some air, some gap between no matter what was said. I think everyone needed a clearing of air before we proceeded. But ultimately, we did hire Steve to do a job, and is it up to this council to override the job that we hired him to do? And that is to run the department. Are there any more thoughts before we make a final determination? Procedurally, we take a motion and a second and then proceed with a roll call. What is our, I have never done this and hope we never have to do it again, so.
You can always call for roll call.
Okay.
Can I ask another question?
Yep.
Should we decide to reverse the termination? What sort of, I mean, obviously this is up to Steve, if it's up to Patty as the administrator, what sort of consequences might there be to an employee who basically terminated their position and coming back? Is there any sort of consequence of leaving your place of work without authorization? Is there written warnings? Is there verbal warnings? What would happen in that case? I'm just putting that out there based on the decision that we have to make now. This to me is not done. That I think, you know, should it be decided to reinstate her employment, I don't think this is the end. I think there needs to be some involvement with others to determine any sort of disciplinary action. Should that be the case, and should it be necessary? So.
What does the rest of the council think about what Sarah just said?
I think it's a really valid question. Because if we were to reinstate, obviously we can't just throw our hands up in the air and say, okay, have fun, figure it out. Because there's going to need to be some relationship repairing. There's going to need to be some sort of something in the file. I don't know exactly what that looks like. Do we have any sort of policy or anything that we have written or that we could go off of from the past in the event that that happens?
Anything above and beyond what the handbook says.
This is
that something we can develop for future reference for all departments within the city? We have a consistent.
I'm sure you have verbal warning notices, written warning notices. That's essentially what I'm referring to.
Yeah, there's step verbal warning.
I mean, I also feel like I'm kind of getting ahead of the game here, but I wanted to say that out loud, just depending upon the vote.
Is there any way that we do reinstate Miss Eskro? Some process that we can create to make it like a mediation, or just make it easier for both people involved so they can work together, so we can do not have to go through.
I think our limitation is to, I think our limitation is to do just one thing.
Mhm.
And I'm going to look at Lindsay because I don't think we can write policy as part of this decision. Right. One thing.
Mhm.
Yep. And I understand all of those things, but I don't want to cloud our side of the things with
Right.
trying to make it easier for, it's either an up or a down.
I
And I would
Appreciate
advocate
the-
that we discuss that in the future, and we need to walk through what our, even just what our mediation policy is in general, what the position of HR is, what their role is in all of our departments.
You'll help us with that, won't you?
So Lindsay, procedurally, then the roll call is, I just do a roll call.
There is nothing. Or how exactly, but I think a motion, with a second and then a roll call if you would prefer.
So, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
because I'm not gonna vote on this, I don't think I have to, even if I make the motion to get it on the floor without further ado, I will make the motion to reinstate Bethany. And then you folks vote your heart.
He's done.
Okay, you can't do that.
Mhm.
All right. I just thought I'd take the onus off everybody else for.
Oh, I made my perspective clear right away, so I can be the person to do it. I would like to make the motion to reinstate Bethany Eskro in her former position.
There a second?
Second.
All right, any further discussion before we do a roll call? All right, roll call.
Marks,
Yes.
Recuse.
Thompson,
Yes.
Elkin,
Yes.
This is just a roll call, correct? Or is this a vote?
This is a roll call vote.
Roll call
Yes.
to overturn, the motion is to overturn the termination.
No.
Planum,
Yes.
So a
Motion to
I'll
adjourn.
make a motion to adjourn.
motion by Eric and second by Sarah. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.